Hi everyone, welcome at Wavect. Today we are going to talk about how to contribute to open source projects, since someone asked it in the comments and I want to provide as much value as possible. So let's do this. One assumption I'm going to make today is that you at least wrote some code before. So basically I assume that you actually know how developing works in general. But since that question implies for me a little bit that you haven't had that much experience yet, I will at least in a concise manner explain what GitHub, GitLab, and Git itself is, and why we actually have open source itself, right? How does that? Why do people publish their code, right? And this topic in general is super relevant, especially for Web3, because if you look at any project, like if you, for example, look at NFT or token projects, even the small ones, almost always they accept it's a scam, right? They open source their code. The smart contract is verified on Etherscan or whatever blockchain they're on. So basically, you always see how things work, right? Meaning it's open source. And if you look at protocols or even blockchains itself, like the clients, the nodes, and so on, the whole software stack, it's almost all the time, at least a huge chunk of it, also open source, right? For sure, it depends on the company that stands behind that. Some of it is even patented, but in general, most of it is open source. And therefore, you're also able, in theory, to contribute to that. And if people like what you did, they almost certainly will merge it, which means including your code into the actual code base, which is awesome, which is amazing. Because it's basically just free work for them, right? It's giving value and yeah, without zero expectations. For you as a developer, it's great to build basically to get some reputation, right? People see that you're able to do what you maybe claim to do on social media, right? LinkedIn, whatsoever. And that's a good thing, as always. And there is something I would say, maybe let's start with Git itself. Um, if you have a small thought experiment now, right? Especially if you try to develop larger things, larger software, you can't do it all alone, right? That's an issue. And that's the starting point when you need to collaborate with other people. Meaning collaborating with people on the same code can become quite an issue, right? Just imagine you develop here on your computer, your friend or whoever develops on another computer. First thing, how do you get your code from A to B and how to sync that up? That's the main issue, right? If you make a change in file A, he makes a change in file B, or maybe even the same file, it's going to be a really mess to actually merge, combine these changes into one unified code base. So that's where so-called Git, one of the, I would say, the most known version control system, most widely used, one comes in, right? That's basically a command line tool. So basically, if you use, I would say something like IntelliJ, VS Code, or Visual Studio in general, or any other IDE, which is just an developer environment where you program, they abstract, I would say, those command line commands away from you. But in general, you can also just go to command line and use it, like git add is, for example, one command, git commit, etc. Right? That's not a Git tutorial today. There are many great ones out there, and especially this whole YouTube channel is about crypto and Web3, so I want to focus that. So this video is already a little bit, off the chart. But since, as I said, crypto is very open source, that's why we're going to do this video today. Yeah, Git is the version control system. Basically, that's a client software. And then there's, for example, GitHub, right? Or there's GitLab as well. Those two are nothing else than, I would say, they give you additional functionality over Git, and they help you visualize things, right? You see what kind of changes have you done. They show you how to, if there are conflicts, right? If someone edited the same line of code in both, also both people edit the same line of code, then the software can't really sufficiently decide which one is the correct one. That's when actually this software provides you a better, or basically it's from Git itself, like the merging process, but they provide you a leaner and more readable interface to actually merge that, right? So it's just a UI, just a UI to make it, yeah, easier for you to collaborate with others. And that the same applies to GitHub, which I most of the time use, and as far as I'm not misinformed, most people use. So I'm going to stick with GitHub today, but both are awesome, right? GitLab is, I think, a little bit more open source themselves, because you can easily host GitLab on your own servers, which means you can have it self-hosted, which is a requirement for some companies. I'm not sure about that for GitHub, maybe in a paid version. But in general, I would stick with GitHub today because I think that's the main one for open source itself. And yeah, usually you have a profile there, right? If you make an account, which you will need, then you have basically, yeah, you can add a README, which means a description about yourself, but not necessarily. You will have some repositories here, which you either pinned, like I did, if you have many of them, or in general, it's just the last ones which you develop most on. And each of these, I would say, rectangles is one code base, which means one code project where you actually develop on things, right? And there is, for example, then also an area here where you see, oh, that's the companies he's contributing to, where he's building things, and so on. And there's also a small one, another rectangle, where you actually see the activity, right? The brighter it is, the more you actually coded on that day. And if it's gray, actually didn't push at least onto GitHub, maybe to develop locally, but you didn't push on there. Yeah, in general, that's that, right? And if, yeah, there's another tab where you basically see repositories, what things you worked on. And the main question now is, since we are now familiar with the general, I would say, platform itself, we want to contribute to open source projects, right? I have some here because I gave them a favorite, which means I just said with a star, which is just a like, I like them, right? I will just search for some, for example. Let's go for UseDeb, which is a great framework, a React framework, where you can develop the apps. And as you can see, 92 people actually collaborating on that repository, right? So, and you can do, because it's open source, right? We see the code here. We can go into each of these folders, go down the code base, down to whatever, see what they've written, right? And what we also see is how many people contributed to that. We also see the history of that file. And that's where the power of Git and in combination for better UI, GitHub, GitLab comes in, right? And now the question remains how to actually contribute to that, right? I can't just go on there and change a file, right? Because who knows what you changed is a good change, right? You could introduce bugs, you could make it wrong or in a way that people are not happy with because it's maybe not clean code, right? Or it doesn't follow their guidelines, like how you actually should write code or whatsoever. And there is something called, I think to let you explain that, to give you more context on that, there is something called a branch, right? As you can see, they have many of them. And what you do now, for example, right? There are basically two ways. You can't directly change this code, right? For obvious reasons. Yeah? You can now, for example, download, for example, here. There are different ways. I'm not going to explain SSH and HTTPS now. But in general, you can clone that repository locally, which means you can go to your desktop, for example, and type in git clone the whole repository. You can see it just downloads it to my computer. That's awesome. And it should be here. Sorry, my desktop is a little bit messy. And it's there, right? We can't just, also if we made our changes, for example, there would be following commands like git add, git commit, where you type in a message what you did change, and git push, right? Those would be the three commands which would let you push or upload your changes to their code base, right? That's not a Git tutorial itself, because there are many awesome tutorials out there just showing you how to actually contribute. So, okay, we now know how to, in general, upload things, right? But as said, you can't just upload it to this exact code base, because then other people would start using it, right? Other people would think that's a stable software, that's the software people are confident in that it works, right? But I could, I could introduce bugs now, for example, and people should have an eye on that and evaluate if it's a good change or not, right? That's really important for quality here. And for that, we have something called a branch, right? For example, if I do this, say my change, I'm creating a new branch in that case, and I'm going into that branch. A branch is nothing else than, I would say, another copy of your code base, which means if I make changes now in that directory anywhere and go back to the main branch, which is, as you can see here, the master branch. That's the main one, which means that's the production ready branch. In some cases, it's the new name is actually main or master, right? Those two are the major branches, which are for production use most of the time. And yeah, basically, what you would do now is you make your changes, right? You if you're done with the changes, for example, I'm going to change here something, going to add a new line. Then Git should recognize that. I type in git add, which means are the new files whatsoever, just analyze the repository. What did that change? New line. It's the message. You can see one file changed, one insertion, one deletion, whatever that deletion is. And then we could do push in general. And as you can see, I don't have the permission here. All right. What we see now is they don't allow you, for another obvious reason, to contribute to their direct repository because other people could use it. All right. That's an issue because they actually have to add you manually as contributor, right? As someone who is allowed to collaborate on that. Since that, if you just want to contribute to an open source repository, that isn't easily possible, right? So we still need that this branch understanding for all that that we're going to do now. But one thing, if you really want to contribute to open source, is you need to fork the repository, for example, right? If you click here, then what this is doing, you create an exact independent copy of their code base on your own account, right? I create a fork, and you can see that's now on my account, and it says here it's forked from theirs, right? I'm going to make it easy now. You could reuse that repository, that code base here, because you could just change the target, which means to which link it points to. But I make it easy now. You basically can again just clone the repository. Come on. And then, let me show you. Then you actually can make changes, right? Add a new line. I should have used SSH because I'm using that in normal cases. But yeah, I'm typing in new line. It says the same as before. Okay. What we have now is it should be pushed. Awesome. It's here. Don't get confused by that undefined. That's something I have set for myself because I have multiple Git accounts, GitHub accounts. So we have now a new change here, right? How do I get that into their main repository, right? As said, I can just merge that because they want to evaluate if it's a good change. What we could do now is we could create a new pull request. And a pull request is nothing else than I am going to let them know that I changed something, and I asked them, like their contributors, their core team, to actually look at that if it's a good change or not, right? They're definitely not going to approve that because it doesn't make sense what I did. But what we could do now is, as you can see, that's my repository. That one I forked, copied, cloned, right? Because VSDT is my account, and that's there, right? So basically, what I could do now is create a pull request, describe what I did, and click on that button, right? If I do this now, they see it on there. You see now I'm already on their account, their repository again. They would see it there in that tab. Those are existing pull requests from people. And they can decide then if it's a good change or not. They can comment, they can let you know, hey, that's a good idea, that's not a good idea. Please change that to that. Then some checks might run, because especially the larger ones also have tests running, which means evaluating if your change breaks things, and so on and so on. So I hope I wasn't like too superficial. I hope I wasn't like too basic. But in general, I think that's how you contribute to an open source project. Most important it is that you understand what kind of changes they expect, what kind of direction they want to go, and that you actually contribute things that are helpful, well written, are tested in best case. Like if you provide tests in some kind of sense and a great documentation on your change, which means writing a good description in your pull request, for example, then they didn't. But in general, it's just a draft, right? But if you look at that one, yeah, they don't take it seriously with description, as it seems. But in general, that would be best practice if you describe what you have changed. And yeah, I hope you got some value out of it. Wasn't like super crypto related now, but since someone asked, and crypto is super open source, I thought, let's do that. Thank you for watching.